The tidal wave of bankruptcies is coming. No big surprise that this is going to fall back to debt every time. It's always about being overextended and overleveraged. They're speculating that this could end up being even worse than what we went through in the last Great Recession. Hey guys, welcome back to the VIP Financial Ed channel. We've been talking a lot about predictions. What can we expect from the marketplace? Why do I think that the housing market is in trouble? And we never expected that we would obviously be seeing between 30 and 40 million people currently unemployed in this country. Obviously, those numbers are very, very hard to speculate based on a number of variables we've talked about in other videos. But an article comes out in the New York Times that reminded me of how cyclical businesses can be, how cyclical bull and bear markets are, and how predictable they can end up being when you're seeing certain cracks exposed. And the dots have been connecting for a long time. And now all of a sudden, we're seeing articles like this come out. Let me know in the comments section what you think is going to happen. I'm always really interested in the dialogue on this. Obviously, none of us have a crystal ball, but these are some of the clues I think that are being mentioned that I'm taking notice of. This is called "The Tidal Wave of Bankruptcies is Coming." This is a recent article in the New York Times written by Mary Williams Walsh. Let's see what she has to say. She thinks that experts are foreseeing so many filings in the coming months that the courts could struggle to salvage the businesses that are worth saving. Already, companies large and small are succumbing to the effects of coronavirus. They include household names like Hertz and J. Crew, and the wave of bankruptcies is going to get bigger. Edward I. Altman, the creator of the Z-score, widely used method of predicting business failures, estimated that this year will easily set a record for the so-called mega bankruptcies, which are filings by companies with $1 billion or more in debt. No big surprise that this is going to fall back to debt every time. It's always about being overextended and overleveraged. To challenge the record that was set the year after the 2008 economic crisis. So it looks as if they're speculating that this could end up being even worse than what we went through in the Great Recession. Even a meaningful rebound in economic activity over the coming months won't stop it, said Mr. Altman. He quotes, "The really hurting companies are too far gone to be saved." This means a lot of opportunities, ladies and gentlemen. Many are teetering on the edge. Chesapeake Energy, once the second largest natural gas company in the country, is wrestling with about $9 billion in debt. Tailored Brands, which is the parent of Men's Warehouse, Joseph A. Bank, and K&G, recently disclosed that it too might have to file for bankruptcy protection. So did Weatherford International, an oil field services company that emerged from bankruptcy only in December. More than 6,800 companies filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection last year, and this year will almost certainly have more. The flood of petitions from the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression could swamp the system, making it harder to save the companies that can be rescued, bankruptcy experts said. So this is saying that this would be the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression. That's how I'm reading that. Most good-sized companies that go into bankruptcy try to restructure themselves, working out payment agreements for their debts so that they can stay open. Again, guys, it's always going to come down to owing the money. This is why I love leverage and treat debt as my worst enemy. That's what you're going to learn on this channel if you are a subscriber. So make sure you hit that subscribe button, because I'm going to teach you how to have the best of both worlds. Why is it not okay to want your cake and eat it too when it comes to borrowing money? I don't want to owe money, but I want to get ahead faster. If you believe that leverage can help serve you, but you want to mitigate the risk of that leverage by restructuring the terms of repayment before you're in trouble, where it's accelerated, make sure you tune into all the videos. So it says, if a plan can't be worked out or it isn't successful, they can be liquidated instead. Equipment and property are sold off to pay debts and the company disappears. Without reform in the system, we anticipate that a significant fraction of viable small businesses will be forced to liquidate, causing high and irreversible economic losses, end quote. A group of academics said in a letter to Congress in May. Workers will lose jobs even in otherwise viable businesses, end quote. That means that folks, people, including yourself, if you're not staying ahead of this, can end up getting into trouble. And when other people end up being in trouble, unfortunately, that's when people who are prepared are able to get even further ahead, and much, much further than at any other time. One of the best times to ever start a business was at the very, very, middle of the last downturn. It was before we hit the bottom and started going back up. That's when most of the people that I surround myself with who practice success started to really see huge progress when it came to their results. So keep in mind that we may not be far away from the best timeline for you, even though it might end up being the most scary time, even though it might come with the most changes, even though it might be the most uncomfortable. it doesn't change that if you are staying level-headed and you're continuing to do research like this and we're going through the information, you're able to make behavioral plans that you consistently execute, which gets you obviously to your end destination further, faster, and even more safely. Now, among their suggestions, increasing budget to recall retired judges and hire more clerks, and giving companies more time to come up with workable plans to prevent them from being sold off for parts. Quote, tight deadlines may lead to overly optimistic restructuring plans and subsequent refilings that will congest courts and delay future recoveries, they wrote. The pandemic, with its lockdowns, which have just started to ease, and by the way, seemingly in more areas that I'm happy about, are coming back. But with the lockdowns that were starting to ease, it was enough on its own to put some businesses under, because again, just having to be closed for that brief period of time, people weren't prepared. They didn't have proper liquidity. They're overextended. They have too many servicing costs. Obviously, receivables start to drop off. They might lose relationships with vendors. It seems doom and gloom, but it's important for us to cover it so that we can properly prepare. Don't get stuck in the doom and gloom. Get stuck in the solutions. Get stuck in the solving of the problem versus the problem itself. But listen to this. The gym chain 24 Hour Fitness, for example, declared bankruptcy this week, saying that it would close 100 locations. This article is a little bit older, I think June 18th. So in many cases, the coronavirus crisis exposed deeper problems like staggering debts run up by companies whose business models were already struggling to deal with changes in consumer behavior. They're talking about Hertz. It's been weighed down by debt created in the leveraged buyout more than a decade ago. And it added to it with the acquisition of Dollar Thrifty in 2012. As it was battling direct competitors, the ascent of Uber and Lyft further obviously upended the rental car industry. J. Crew, Neiman Marcus were carrying heavy debt loads from leveraged buyouts by private equity firms. A run of defaults looks almost inevitable. At the end of the first quarter this year, U.S. companies had amassed nearly $10.5 trillion in debt, by far the most since the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis began tracking the figure at the end of World War II. Guys, this is where we're going to run into big problems. When people are underemployed and unemployed, and you start seeing this trickle-down effect of big companies and middle-sized companies being basically forced into closure due to being overextended and over-leveraged, guess what? All of those jobs go away. And the unemployment numbers suffer as a result of that. And people who had homes are then forced to obviously restructure a payment plan with their lender or risk facing short sale or foreclosure. And that is where we start to see the housing market correct itself. Okay, I realize it's not a fun subject, but it is fun if you're prepared. It's not fun if you're not prepared. Okay, so you have the time. I don't know how many times you're going to have to seek out content like mine. There's plenty of it on this platform in general, but people are trying to scream it from the mountaintops and help you avoid it. Okay, so if you're not at great risk now, prevent it from ever happening by being a prepper, okay? Now, having a lot more debt to deal with is likely to make the coming bankruptcies a bruising experience for unsecured creditors, that's right, who may include retirees with pensions or health benefits, vendors waiting to be paid, tort plaintiffs whose lawsuits are cut short, and sometimes even current workers. If a company goes into bankruptcy with more secured debts than the value of its assets, the secured creditors, including vulture investors who bought up the debt for a song, can walk away with virtually everything. Pennies on the dollar, folks. The sums at play in some cases will be enormous. Mr. Altman expects at least 66 cases with more than $1 billion in debt this year, eclipsing 2009's mark of 49. He also predicted 192 bankruptcies involving at least $100 million in debt, which would trail only 2009's record of 242. Versus 192. Robert J. Keach, a director at the American College of Bankruptcy, said many companies had so far managed to put off bankruptcy by amassing cash and conserving it as best they can, drawing down existing lines of credit, furloughing workers, delaying projects, and taking advantage of federal and state pandemic relief options. No question about that. And we've even talked about where we seek some of that to be a pro. Again, part of prepping is having access to capital and liquidity. What's the alternative? To not go further into debt and to close earlier. At the end of the day, these companies, big and small, are just trying to survive. When these programs expire, the companies will start burning through their cash. That's when the bankruptcy filings are likely to soar and stay elevated, Mr. Keach said. That's exactly right. Wait until the stimulus wears off. Then we're going to see things rise to the surface. What then, right? Expect a COVID-19 cliff in the next 30 to 60 days, he said. 30 to 60? Well, it wouldn't surprise me. What would surprise you at this point in 2020? Leave it in the comments below. Companies that received loans under the federal Paycheck Protection Program may be waiting to file. The loans can be converted to grants if the company meets certain requirements and if the borrower can put off bankruptcy until they're sure they won't have to pay the money back. They will have more cash when they file. That's an important consideration because Chapter 11 is expensive. A bankruptcy company must pay the fees of the lawyers and other professionals that help reorganize, as well as the fees of those who advise the official creditors committee. The experts' recommendations to Congress walk a fine line. They suggest allowing companies more time to come up with the reorganization plans, even though Chapter 11 cases are supposed to move quickly so that bankrupt companies don't burn through all their cash before they reorganize. Generally, the longer a company stays in bankruptcy, the greater the chance of a liquidation, and that increases the likelihood that the company's troubles will spread. Suppliers of raw materials could fold if a manufacturer languishes in bankruptcy. Smaller stores and entirely different lines of business can suffer if a shopping mall anchor can't stay open. Think about that for a minute. These risks are real, said Robert E. Gerber, who retired in 2016 as a bankruptcy judge in the Southern District of New York. One of his cases was the 2009 bankruptcy of General Motors, which moved at lightning speed to keep the automaker from going under for good. If GM had failed, God knows how many companies in the supply chain would have failed. And this would have snowballed terribly, said Mr. Gerber. The cascade would have wiped out paychecks to workers throughout the supply chain, threatening other businesses and even finances of the local governments that count on them for the tax revenues, right? The trickle-down effect, it is widespread. That, Mr. Gerber said, makes it imperative that the bankruptcy system have the resources to deal with the coming rush of cases. Where do those come from? I know where. Do you? Bankruptcy can't print money for those companies, he said, but it can give a good number of them a chance of survival. What do you guys think in the comments section below? This is why I will never, ever stop recommending that you start. I will never stop recommending that you begin taking action. How can you possibly, if you're a W-2 wage earner listening to this, how can you rest comfortably at night relying on somebody else to make your monthly payments for you? If you're laid off because they go out of business, what are you going to do? You've got to have at least 2, 3, 4, 5 different plans in the works at all times. This isn't about one or the other. This is about giving it everything you've got, not wasting time on the small stuff. Unless you're safe, you don't have the ability to excuse yourself from that right now. You have to dedicate the time. It's very, very important. So I hope this type of video is less of a scare tactic and more of motivation for you. But at the end of the day, all I can do is talk about the risks and review then the solutions. Talk about the risks, focus on the solutions. Solutions in this case are to visit freecoachingcalendar.com. We've got 4 primary solutions for you. They range in price from very inexpensive to very expensive. If you're planning on spending tens of dollars, you're not a business person, you're still in the research phase, and that's completely okay. If you're in the action phase and you're in business, you need to plan on spending thousands of dollars in your life on growth of that business. That's why if you're not preparing, it's going to only get harder and harder and harder. You don't want to get behind the 8 ball on any of this. And when you use leverage, it needs to be used the right way. So watch all the videos on this channel to get a sense of why we recommend treating debt as your worst enemy while simultaneously valuing leverage to get ahead as fast and safely as possible. Guys, we'll see you on the next video. I hope you're having a great summer in spite of everything that's going on. Make sure you continue to have fun. I'm actually going to take the boats in the back and I'm going to just go out and sit on the lake for a little bit. So I look forward to seeing some of you guys here again soon on the in our coaching sessions. And until then, make it a great day and keep on cash flowing. Bye-bye.